you are invested in the Cersei Nyx, and there are other people invested in it, but it doesn't seem like there's a fair chance.
Hello and welcome to the Forgeborn Finishing School. Casey, Kid, and Core here. We'll be analyzing Forgeborn battles to help take your game to the next level. Hey everyone, welcome back for another episode here on the Forgeborn Finishing School. Just to quickly cover some upcoming events, we've talked about them before, but next week is the Great Plains Game Festival. It's a sealed event in Nebraska on the 23rd of March. Greg, you're going to be heading out there for some sealed action.
Yep.
And then FuseFest 2 Storyline Event is on the 27th of April. Right now, we don't really have any other details than what is in that description. Stay tuned. I'm sure Stoneblade is getting ready to put out a schedule of events, or how to show up and check in if the Storyline event is the event. Just to kind of help us, anyone traveling to kind of make their plans and get things together. So I suspect we'll get some more information here very soon. And then other than that, Greg, I guess I kind of had two things come up over the last week that I wanted to talk about really for this episode. So, yeah, I've expanded our cameras here. We're not going to put a lot on the screen. This is going to be mostly us talking. There'll be one thing I throw up, just kind of, some rules we talk about for an event. But yeah, let's jump into that. So, our friends down in Australia, the Ausforge, held a storyline event. This was the Nekrium event. So this was the four factions. Each faction gets a lore event, and each Forge Guardian, I think, is allowed to run a physical event and an online event for each faction. We really haven't seen a bunch of these pop up. I think we've seen one Aloyan, maybe two Utera, maybe only one. Two Utera. One was done physically, one was done online. Mm-hmm. One Aloyan and now one Nekrium. The Aloyan was physical at Con of the North, and then this Nekrium one was down in Australia. And so these events are basically when you show up, you get to pick a faction. So I was able to go with the online Utera one. We talked about that in an episode, so I don't want to beat it up too much, but at the time, we both kind of thought Loxodon seemed quite a bit more universally powerful than Tala. Tala had niche use cases. I ended up playing Tala, but Loxodon universally more powerful. And then, we kind of thought, hey, one off, it's, you can't always balance everything perfectly, So this Nekrium event, Greg, and maybe I'm a little biased. I'm going to throw that out there, right? I like Cersei in this setup. So it's Cersei versus Nyx, which is also very interesting in that, the Aloyan ones, you got the Forgeborn. You get to pick one. In the Nekrium one, the Forgeborn, you get to pick one. In Utera, was seemingly two people or entities that we didn't have a lot of experience with and were not that prevalent in the story before this. Maybe they will be. Maybe that was a decider that Loxodon is now going to become a bigger part of the story. We'll see. So to kind of get back on track here, though, Nyx Nakaya's ability was that after 15 minutes, I think, you get to just reanimate a creature out of your vanish pile. And Cersei's was, at any point, you just get to deal 5 damage to a player. I think most players, even new players, would say that is a fairly lopsided deal. But maybe that's me, so I'm gonna let you take this away and give me your initial impressions.
Yeah, I understand where the biases that you're coming from. I don't really, I like the Cersei more than Nyx, but that's part of it just because of a gameplay function, and I know that you like Cersei, but just from a purely strategic standpoint, and from a new player, like, being able to reanimate within in 15 minutes, like, I'm usually in the third cycle, like, being able to reanimate another creature is huge. Like, that's board state, which is going to help you push more damage. Like, I would take that every time. Maybe if you made the case, like, Cersei could do 5 damage to a creature or a player, it would be more useful because you could do damage to the creature, which then allows you to do more damage that way. But even then, I probably still lean towards reanimate in that case. But without having that distinction, that reanimate is so much more powerful, especially when you start looking at like, reanimating your mantis, right? Like that would be huge, like.
Yeah.
So there are just, your Stitchers or your like your Dark Hearts. Like there are so many power cards that even in, cycle 2 can make huge dramatic impacts in the game. Whereas 5 damage, I'm usually not too worried about taking 5 damage. So
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. The very first episode of the Forgeborn Finishing School was entirely premised around it's okay to take damage. And 5 damage is, outside of a wisp, is almost about the, is on the pretty low end of a creature hitting you.
yeah.
And yeah, I think we found that, like you mentioned it, board state this game is pretty crucially about board state because there's not a lot of board wipes. That's one thing that this game doesn't have a severe amount of. Even the Firestorm isn't a dedicated board wipe, right? It's 4 damage to all creatures. The closest I think we get is Elementalist Ritual in the right deck is probably the closest to a board wipe. And we've seen Mundungu play that in Worlds, able to activate his Forgeborn ability with an Elementalist Ritual to just nuke the board, but that takes a lot to set up. So board state in this game is really like the catalyst, the propellant to victory.
Yeah, like most of the times, like we talk about it a lot, like 2-for-1 cards are huge, right? There's a reason why they're big and there's not a lot of them. So we talk about free plays being huge. We build decks. You see the high-end decks find ways to get free plays or 2-for-1s, right? Maybe just think about it. Oh man, you always get me with these. You always give me with these things, Ryan. But like, take a look at like it's running my hand. But the one that's like free spell, just deal 5 damage to both players. Like,
yeah, Flame Jet.
Yeah, Flame Jet. It's 5 damage. You're taking that to yourself. And you're doing it to your opponent. But it's a free spell. Like it's again a free action. Like,
let's take another angle at this because I think I see what's in your head, but I'm gonna put it this way. Let's look at the ceiling of each ability. Okay. So the ceiling of Cersei's ability is I'm gonna do 5 damage to a player. It doesn't change. It's capped. You've already potentially mentioned the ceiling of the. You've already mentioned the ceilings of the Nyx Nakai's ability, and I think it's probably Stitcher, but Mantis is also right up there. Like they're both there, depending on your deck. If your deck is optimized to do some Stitcher shenanigans, it's going to get out of hand. Any other deck with a Mantis is just super powerful. So what you're saying is Nyx gets a free creature potentially and access to another Forgeborn activation, whereas Cersei the ceiling is 5 damage.
Can you imagine my main deck, just getting a free Mantis in cycle 2?
Yeah, well, there you get another +20/+20 to any creature.
Yeah, like.
Yeah. So that's potentially, even if all you had was a Mantis, you just threw a 24/24 on the board with your ability. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just for the, and you're probably going to get into this again, like to the Loxodon Tala thing, there's some bias in there from the thing. It's not that impactful. Like people don't know what those factions were. They weren't invested in them. I feel like people are invested in the Cersei, like you are invested in the Cersei Nyx, and there are other people invested in it, but it doesn't seem like there's a fair chance. Like,
yeah. And so now that you've brought us there, that's the next part of this conversation, right? Is that in the last events, let's say, the Uteran one I attended, and I'm pretty sure the Eloin one, but I wasn't there, the faction that was selected and won the most events, or won the most matches in the event, was the winning faction. So in the Utera one, Loxodon was, I forget, we go back to the episode, but it was 80% of the selections, right? If not more. I know 3 players out of the entire player base had picked Tala. So just the chances there alone and then you're talking about a more powerful ability, which is why it got selected up to that 80% threshold, is going to win more matches. And so by the second round of the tournament, it was already a sealed deal that locks it on hand one. No matter what happened in the third round, Tala could come back, right? That's how overwhelming it was. And in my opinion, the same thing happened at this Nekrium event, right? And so that's the way the tally was calculated. Now, I do appreciate Ausforge kind of putting out a write-up that was really phenomenal. And, you know, anytime we have a link to another or a discussion about another content creator or someone putting something out, we'll have a link in the description. So check that out if you haven't. It was a really good write-up. But Nick Fletcher, you know, we had on the episode last week, who's an awesome vocal part of the community from Stoneblade, you know, a touch point for us all, reiterated that that's not necessarily the way that the faction points were supposed to be scored. So now here I'm going to throw up an image on the screen so everyone can read the exact intent of the way it was supposed to be scored. And because I prefaced this first, the beginning of this episode was saying, hey, it's going to be predominantly audio, I'm going to read this out verbatim, Greg. So if anyone's just listening in the car, which is what I do for YouTube videos a lot of time. Each player declares whether they will activate their respective abilities adhering to the Forge order. Then they discreetly show their faction slips to each other. The influence gains are as follows. If neither player activated their ability and both belong to the same faction, their faction gains 3 influence points. If only one player activated their ability and they belong to different factions, the activating player's faction gains influence points. If both players are from the same faction and at least one activated their ability, no influence points are awarded to either side. So what do you think of the way it should have been ran?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it looks like this is like a prisoner dilemma scenario almost, but maybe not quite. You know, similar vein at least. So I think they mentioned that most of the players had selected Nikaya, and a lot of players, I think they had some newer players in there as well, and even experienced players, right? And so you also have, again, you know, you also have prize support, you know, for winning. So like people are gonna want to pick the things that win and do the things that help them win. It doesn't seem to mesh to me. Like, I don't know. I haven't necessarily like dug into the mathematics on it or like the scenarios, but to me, it just seems like most people are gonna pop it and go. And what happens, you know, if neither player activated their ability, I mean, most times both players activated their ability, but if neither player did, they'll each gain 3 influence, right? So that's the prisoner's dilemma thing. Like, if you both don't take advantage of it, you both get rewarded. If one player activated and they belong to a different faction, they'll get it, right? So if you're Cersei versus Nyx and Cersei activates it, you know, so you could say, well, it kind of gives an advantage to Nyx in that case, right? Because like, they're gonna want to activate it, and the Cersei could activate it, but they're better off holding on to that till they get their opponent down to 5 or lower a lot of times, or they're gonna activate it as soon as possible if they're playing against the Swamp Moss Lurker, right? In which case, that's a detriment, right? So like, it's just weird, right, in the way that they work. And then if both players in faction, at least one activated their ability, so if they're both the same, then like if it's just everybody playing Nixakaya, then and they all activated and they, you know, wouldn't have got their thing. And I don't know, it just seems really convoluted. And
I like what you said, like convoluted. Like, here's my interpretation of the process. No matter how many people are playing Nyx and no matter how many people are playing Cersei, right? Let's just say the vast majority are playing Nyx, which is what happened here. So we're going to rule out the first rule if neither player activated their abilities, because that's not going to happen. In my opinion, that's probably never going to happen.
I mean, it happened in the Storyline event in Worlds. Like, people just didn't activate it or chose not to. But there was also a detrimental effect to it. So maybe that's why you would say...
Yeah, there were some unknowns there. Whereas, and again, this was in the rules for the event.
Yeah.
So then the second one. If only one player activated their ability and they belong to a different faction, the activating player's faction gains 3 influence points. That's also probably not going to happen, because as soon as you activate yours, I am going to try to catch pace. But let's imagine where someone doesn't. Maybe someone never activates the Cersei ability because it is not useful at that point. Like they're that far behind. Or Nyx doesn't activate it because they beat you before 15 minutes elapses. Unlikely, especially in an event with newer players, but potential.
Yeah.
So this is the one I think where we have the chance for points to be scored, right? And then the last one, if both players are from the same faction and at least one activated their ability, no influence points are awarded. I assume this is going to happen drastically when Nyx players are playing against Nyx players. And then rarely when Cersei's playing against Nyx. But because there's only two factions, this third rule is probably not necessary, right? If there were three factions, I would see this one making a lot more sense. That's the way I kind of read through these rules. And so it is just, like you said, convoluted. And then it wasn't adhered to for 2 out of the 3 events. Which is a learning moment, I guess. They were in the rules. But
I think there's only been one event with this, right? This particular, each of the factions have had a different rule set assigned to how you get points.
Fair.
So okay. I think that this Prisoner's Dilemma was just for purple. But again, like if you look at Cersei, right? Like you're looking at, okay, I want to. There's no point in me hitting you just with 5 for whenever. It's really based on like either getting you below a threshold if you're running Arborist or Swamp Moss. I think that's only 2.
Yeah, get below life threshold or kill.
Yeah, or kill you. Right. So like, otherwise you just do it to panic somebody. Like.
Yeah. Yeah, so now let's go to the third and last part of the discussion. I'm going to throw out a solution, and this kind of came up last time we talked about storyline events, and I think we've had 2 episodes across the past where this has been brought up. One was the original lore episode where we kind of put a little thought into that, and then after the Utera event. So 2 ways to do this, I think. If you want the storyline to be dictated by players, if that is your premise and you truly believe the storyline should be dictated by players, there's 2 ways to do that. And I'm going to say the first one, which I think is the lesser option, the one that's probably not as great for everybody. And that is that you're given a heads up, 2 months before the event, and you're told to bring the Forgeborn of your choice that fits the faction you choose. So if you wanted to back Nyx Nakia, you have to play Nyx Nakia. If you want to back Cersei, you play Cersei. Now, there's 2 reasons I think that's the lesser option. One is, generally speaking, Cersei is already considered stronger than Nyx Nakia, so we kind of end up back in that same scenario. And then 2, it's definitely possible a new player doesn't have that Forgeborn. And so the event organizer would have to supply a generic Nyx Nakia or Cersei to hand to that player to swap out into a deck.
Yeah. So, are you going to your second one now, or?
I was gonna, but go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, before we get too far into that, I want to just talk about this one. And so I think you have a trouble with that in Sealed, right?
Yep.
Which I like these storylines, the way that they're kind of constructed. I think Sealed works well. In this case, I don't think it was a Sealed event, but you'd run into those limitations. 2, again, going back to, yes, Cersei is generally more powerful than Nyx Nakia. In such a limited scope that we have, I think that makes a difference. That's somewhat how L5R used to run it. Like, you played the faction that you wanted to do, but there was a lot more. There were factions that were more powerful, and so they would tend to get a leg up on some of the personalities and stuff. But
yeah,
those were all generally. They still balanced the game. Like, even though you got the Topaz champion, you would still have another unique that just wouldn't have Topaz champion, right? Like, so they still evolved it that way, but they'll let you like identify that, which is what I like. So even if your faction was winning, but also because there was like 9 clans, you had a much more disparity between just Cersei and Nyx Nakia, causing the concern. But the other thing is a lot of cases that things that may be more, could be impactful or more impactful. It was based on how many people played that faction, right? So
Yeah.
not necessarily who won the tournament, which would be some of the big things like who won the tournament, but like there'd be other things like how many Phoenix players played or what did you put your vote towards, like so you could do something similar being like doesn't matter if you won. If you won, you get the prize support, right? You get this cool stuff. But let's have the player base just take a vote and like you show up to that tournament with the Nyx Nikayo deck, right? So if you wanted to really impact the storyline, you could just play what you wanted to play. If you really wanted to go for the prize support, then you would play which one was more powerful, and so it gives the players the option to more choose, which is what I like. So
Yeah. So really, you kind of just jumped into what I think the better solution is, but mine is a little bit of a tweak on that, and that is that you bring and you play whatever deck you want, or if it's sealed, obviously you and I are both always going to say preferably sealed, but you show up, you play whatever deck you want, and you simply cast a vote when you show up. So when I show up, I say, hey, I'm supporting Nyx Nikayo. You'll never hear me say that at a Storyline event or whatever, but well, things change. Or like, hey, I'm here, I support Cersei. And so my vote goes in the cast, and then at the end of the event, you can do one of two things. One is however many voted for a particular faction, that one just simply wins. Or what I would say, I think I would prefer is the average placement of the people that chose. So you take the top 4 players of each faction, see what their average place is, and whoever is higher, that's the winning faction. And then kind of the one thing I would like to say on top of that is entirely separate on which way we choose this, is that I think that there should be faction-specific prizes for whoever wins that are there available, you know what I mean, in some way, shape, or form. It could be a small token. Like, here's a minion with a little bit of a Nyx flavoring, and here's a minion with a little bit of Cersei flavoring, something like that. But
yeah, you kind of bring up something again, spitballing some like things here. You could be like, all right, you could show up and play. I kind of like the thing like you want to vote for somebody you played in the tournament, right? So you could be like, you play Nyx, you want Nyx to win. You play Cersei, you want to play Cersei to win. You could do the voting thing, and you could, if you want to like make how well you do in a tournament matter, you could put how many votes you get to put into the pool. And so I don't like the top 4 because some people just really like the storyline. A lot of people that really like the storyline sometimes may not be as invested in the
yeah, that's good.
competitive side of it, right? But they like the story. That was a big thing with. But anyways, so you could be like, okay, well, every vote, everybody matters. You go to the tournament, you get to put your vote in, but you could weight that vote. Like if you place first, yours counts as 3. If you place 2, you're 2 or 3. Like so you could kind of like add a metric in there. So everybody gets 1 vote. But if you make a certain level of it, depending on how many people there, you could get yours could count as 2, right? And I like putting your story where you're like playing the deck that like I really want Nyx one. I'm gonna play a Nyx Shambling Shambler deck. That's a competitive good deck that can win tournaments, right? So I think so maybe it's a combination and maybe it's different, and I like your idea of faction kind of rewards things. One of the things that we used to do is like top a faction gets a prize, or top 2 a faction gets a prize, or like you want a storyline tournament at Worlds, no Ironbeard representation, right? So let's do a top a prize per Forgeborn, right? So incentivize people to play things they want to play, and still impact the storyline, right? You played Ironbeard, you get impact the storyline, and there could be prize support around it, right? I think there's a lot of things you can do to drive up more community engagement, and so
yeah, and so I think we're kind of at a good spot for this topic to kind of to tailor it off. But one thing I do want to say is it seems the potential for the paper side of this game with the digital client, it is going to subside a little bit. I don't know in what level, so I don't want to speculate too much, but I think the primary existence, the driving mechanism for the existence of the paper game is the storyline events. That's just my opinion, just one person's opinion here. But so that's why we get very interested in these events. It's the one thing that really, differentiates certain games. L5R was one of them that kind of had this aspect to it. Solforge Fusion right now has this huge storyline aspect that is pretty novel for most people in a lot of games. So we love to see these events, and obviously this lore event rules, even though they weren't necessarily followed, was a change from the last one, so we can see they're tweaking it and things like that.
Yeah, and like I said, we're at least for me, I don't speak for yourself, but like I'm critical because I like enjoy it and I care for it. And I want to see it succeed, and I want to see have people like people feel like they're having an impact. And so I love that we have an ability to impact it, right? I love that there is story and things being put out, and we're getting a more like we're getting a deeper look into the world by these actions occurring, which is awesome. So, but you brought up the paper format and its future with the digital release being in beta now, right? They're working through it, and I mean, I can honestly say like I've jumped in more now with the digital format. It's easy to jump in there and get a game in some cases. But I think the paper side of it, what's really awesome about this game and this community is getting out there and meeting people and hanging out with them, playing the game, talking about the game. FuseFest 2.0. There's a whole people are going to try to get there Friday and hang out. That's awesome, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and you kind of aired off into or sidled into the digital client a little bit, which I started in a way, by saying the storyline's importance to the paper. But that kind of moves us into our next topic, and I think we're going to try to be a little less verbose on this one, myself specifically for sure, but try to keep this one down. But there's a topic that came up that I really just wanted to briefly discuss on this one. And the digital client's great. It does a lot of things really great. We're in beta. We all understand where we're at. And this is where I guess I'm gonna get on a little bit of a soapbox and throw down a gripe. There's been plenty of talk in the Discord channels about how some of the stronger players in the game are moderating themselves and playing less powerful decks, which is great. That's cool to have a little bit of self-regulation. But I think to this date, I've never seen a digital client come out for a competitive card game without any sort of or a competitive game in any way, shape, or form. And I use the term competitive very loosely here, not like competitive for money, pro level, right? Just we're humans. We play a competitive game. There's no matchmaking, and this kind of came up in a chat recently that one player says, "Hey, I'm not bringing my most powerful deck," which is great because then I'm playing against new players and we have good fun games. And then all of a sudden I go up against a player that they brought their A+ tier deck, and I got smoked out of the water. So now, all right, now I'm gonna bring my good deck, and then I just go and get paired up against a new player that doesn't have that strong of a deck. And there's just a feel bad cascading moment for a lot of players because there's no current way to separate deck tiering, which is probably what you have to. You probably can't just do player tiering. Like it's probably got to be deck specific pairing, which the entire competitive format of Solforge Fusion was built around. It just hasn't translated into any matchmaking service in the app.
Yeah. So I'm going to agree with you, and I'm also going to disagree with you. So I know we don't necessarily always disagree. In this case, and it's not necessarily I don't think disagreeing because I think you probably understand this as well. But I agree with you that the game needs some kind of matchmaking, right? There needs some kind of deck leveling thing. I agree with you that it does create a cascading issue, like it's a problem, and I think you agree with me too in the effect of I don't. Again, I'm not one to put words in your mouth, but like I don't like the people calling people out for running a powerful deck.
Oh yeah.
In the Discord, right? Like that. There's no point of that. They want to run that, and it's fun. Let them play that. I've played some, what I would consider B+ decks, maybe even A- decks. And I've also lately just been playing, what I would consider a C tier deck, right? But, and I should do better and like playing a, lower deck. But We don't need to call people out in the Discord for it. If that's what they want to play. Maybe they're playing a deck because they're just trying to understand it better. Maybe they got new cards and they really just want to play a fun deck.
Yep.
Like they just got a Krogus and AC4 deck. Like people should be able to enjoy that with being like, oh well,
Yep.
you know, you should play a lower tier deck for newer players. Like it's fine. But the problem is that there's not a lot of players, and I don't think that we can. I don't think that we can or that they should implement matchmaking right now. And that's where I disagree with you, because most nights I try to jump on, and it's usually pretty late, like 10 o'clock, you know, roughly at night. And I'll jump, or usually between 8 and 10 or whatever. I'll jump in like 4 times and try to jump in queue and not get anybody. I'll get one game in a night. And so if you had matchmaking on top of that, where you're preventing tiers, like, it doesn't do any good. So they could be using those resources somewhere else.
Yeah.
So
Let me add that, so I see where you're going, but the average matchmaking in any game will never prevent a match. It's a tiered timing. They wait a certain window. If someone of the right matchmaking of the right rank level doesn't show up, they pair you down. So like, let's take one of my favorite off games, you know, is Teamfight Tactics. My rank could be of a certain rank. Let's call it purple or orange, right? I think that's the one. And then
hyper.
Or let's say blue. Blue's probably better. Whatever. It doesn't matter. Now we're getting into, but like after a while, I will end up playing against people that are 2 or 3 tiers below me, right? Then I'll play the next game, and the matchmaking will go for a minute or two, and then I'll play someone who's 2 ranks above me, because when there's that few people in the queue, it'll just make it work.
Yeah. What I'm saying is, like, I think they should. I think it's okay that they launched it without matchmaking, because it allows them to put those resources somewhere else.
Okay, yeah, I can see that stance, and this is why, again, good to disagree sometimes, but as a player, I think, especially as a new player, or as like the other end of the spectrum, you know, we have some really experienced players out there, they feel like they can play whatever they want to play, and at least the matchmaking is there doing its service, even if it's not super great at it.
Yeah, I think the game will eventually matchmake, and there's competitive games without matchmaking, and there's things to be said about that, and usually that's because of pay to win stuff. But I think there does need matchmaking. I think that you can launch it without it. What I think is more important is that they add a limited function before they even get to matchmaking, because if they devote the resources to a limited function, that removes much of the need for matchmaking.
Yeah, I could never disagree with saying that we want a limited faction. I think there's enough vocal players out there that would enjoy it. But I will cut back to where you said how, you know, it allowed them to devote resources elsewhere. I understand they don't have the resources to devote to another matchmaking mode when you have players such as yourself that can't find a match late at night. You know, it's just going to divert the player pools into 2 different matchmaking.
That's true too. Good point.
But it has to come eventually. I would expect or hope. Just because that's the version of the game I would love to play at any given time. If I could open up the app and get a random deck go, even if it's a random for my collection, that's at least a first step forward. But yeah, I don't think that would make. I mean, that would make some people happy, but then the eventual, you know, service where if you pay a monthly fee to have access to truly random decks or however that works.
Yeah, I think, and again, you know, this is my biased opinion, right? Like, and again, it doesn't matter what company you are, what you're doing, you're always going to have some resource limitations, right? And so you have to prioritize. So like for me, I would be prioritizing the rules and the bugs working correctly. Like that would be my first priority. My second priority would be a limited function. My third priority would be AI, and then I would do matchmaking. But that's my bias, because like I want the game to work correctly first. I want the rules to work correctly first.
Yeah.
I wanted to have what I consider a better play experience, which is against players in a limited format. So then you have to worry about matchmaking. You don't have to worry about, you know, things going in that nature. And then I think you go with the AI to get that working correctly for when you're just playing against the computer and doing the campaign mode. But they're probably, I could see why they may be more incentivized to do the AI mode before that, right? The single player experience over the multiplayer experience. But to me, this is a multiplayer game. So that's why I would prioritize the first two. And then I would do matchmaking because, again, of the limited player base. You already have the limited option for players to play, and you have the AI players to play, and then you work on the matchmaking.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with the rules, and I do think that's where Stoneblade's focus is. You see they're very active in noticing the bugs and then working on them.
Yep.
They're having, obviously some pretty rough issues with a couple of them, but some of the easy ones they do knock out fairly quick, which is great to see. Especially when it was in alpha, they were popping out bugs left and right really
you
fast.
reported it and bam.
Yeah. And so now I think it doesn't appear as fast to us, but that's because the amount of bugs being reported now that it's in beta has amplified, exponentially.
Yeah, and some of them are harder than others, like the Solforge, the Soulbind issue, right? That's more complex. It's going to take time, right? So, and they're aware of it. They're working on it, so. Yeah, I agree. I think that is, they're focusing on the rules and getting that to work correctly, which also I think their rules is similar to their computer AI, so it kind of goes hand in hand in some of those things. So.
Yeah, and that's a topic for another time. But the rules changing to fit the digital application is something we'll have to discuss another episode.
Yeah, well, let's not go on that one.
Yep. All right, so. A couple of key discussions, a little contention between us, which is good to see. Oftentimes we agree, but not always.
It's an agree-disagree. Like, it's just, know.
Yeah, we know that I typically have the better answer, the more correct answer. No, it's just, of course not. But hey, I think that's all we got this week. So if you're still with us, appreciate you watching the videos. If you're still here and you are a content creator in any way, shape, or form, and you want us to plug your stuff, please let us know. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to discuss, or even players or Stoneblade employees you'd like us to interview, please let us know. We're always out there looking for what you guys want to know, hear, or see. That's the only reason we do this video. There's rumors out there that YouTube pays people. That doesn't happen here. Literally, we're here to help, spread a message. And our opinions are pretty bad typically. So, whatever you want to hear, let us know. We'll break it down. I guess that was just a lot of things to say. Just hey, feel free to reach out to us and let us know what you think. That's all.
And I'll just add on there, if you guys are running any events or you have any recurring events that are occurring on, let us know at least a week in advance, and we're able to plug it into the intro, so people can know that information. So yeah, just reach out to the email address. Ryan, I'm sure you'll put that in the description below. Reach out to there, tell us what your event is, when it is, at least a week in advance, and we'll be able to plug it in the beginning of the video.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for attending this lesson of the Forgeborn Finishing School. If you like this video, please subscribe, comment, or consider donating to our Patreon account. We look forward to our next lesson.